Power Automate really is the workhorse to share files from Microsoft Teams. And I think that's just the beginning. Power Automate really enables a single data source. It connects to upwards of 60 different connectors. It can function across multiple Office 365 applications. You can share files from a singular Teams to multiple SharePoint sites, from multiple SharePoint sites to a single team. Really, there's a lot of application that can be used with Power Automate. And it allows for document movement. And I use like air quotes for movement because when I go through the next steps of how we actually do this, you'll see why. But it does allow for the shareability across all these applications. So next, I'm going to go into really the nitty details of the workflow that we created in Power Automate to facilitate this document movement. Really what we did is we created synced file links across the Microsoft Teams and the project SharePoint site. So I'm going to go through the steps just because if anyone's ever worked in Power Automate and is familiar, the defined details really matter. So the first thing you need to do is when you create a workflow is to set a trigger. So our trigger is when a file is created or modified in the Microsoft Teams channel. So you can see here the site address we have pointed to is the back end document library to that Microsoft Teams channel. So whenever a file is created, if it's edited, if it's deleted, this workflow will be triggered to run. Next, what it does is it actually gets uploaded file content. So this is actually getting the file content using the file identifier again from that Microsoft Teams channel. And then the next step is this switch. And this is where you really have the ability to push this file anywhere you desire, pretty much anywhere that there's a connector. So I'm only going to go over again one of the metadata, one of the options that we had built in. But this switch is based upon this shared with value or this shared with metadata column that I've been mentioning. So basically, you have the ability, like we have here, that the bottom right project SharePoint site, you have the ability to share the file with the project SharePoint site. Again, you can make the shared with value anything. It can be, maybe a team project, a team SharePoint site. It can be an organization SharePoint site or another team. You can dictate, what that shared with value is, and then, have it shared across multiple places. So getting into the project SharePoint site. So when somebody selects on a file in the shared with metadata, they say, I want to share it to the SharePoint site. This next subset of steps occurs. So first what happens is we actually have pointed in this first step, get properties of the file in the document library. We have built in the outward facing SharePoint site a specific document library. And what we want to do here is we want to actually see if that file already exists. Because remember, the files that are coming from Teams and the files that are going to this outward facing SharePoint site are two separate site collections. They're almost considered like, almost two separate, file entities in themselves, even though they're the same, they're still separate site collections. So we identify if that file already exists in the SharePoint site by using the file name. So it's not an exact, exact identifier, a file name, but we try to make it pretty specific. So what this will do is it will look in the outward SharePoint site to see if a file with the same file name exists. And if it does, it will delete that file that exists in the SharePoint site. And then immediately next, what it will do is it will recreate that file in the SharePoint site with the new content. So again, if it's modified, if it's deleted, it would be updated now in that outward facing SharePoint site. And then also the final step in this is to update the file properties. Because like I said, we do have other metadata fields that we do want to track as this file moves across from Teams to various SharePoint sites. We want to keep all of that intact. So this last step enables that. It enables us to keep the file metadata moving along with that file when we do, move it across other places. The one thing I forgot to mention is that this SharePoint site, so the outward facing place where we're basically moving this file, we have made this document library read only to all like visitors. So that's how we're able to kind of control that these files are read only from a non-member like access point of view. So really, if there's any changes or collaborations that are happening to that file, it's only happening in that Microsoft Teams space. People are only going to the SharePoint site to view files. There's no editing or collaboration happening. Everything's defined as being, working in the Microsoft Teams. So again, there's a lot of steps that are happening here, but this from a user experience, this happens very quickly. It's like on the order of 15, 20 seconds. So even though there is document movement, there's a document being deleted and then recreated in a certain site, it happens so quickly, but from a user standpoint, we just say it's being synced because we don't want to add too much confusion.